it being windy like it is out here, I remember when my dad and I were, well, I was a kid, my dad wasn't, but he would take me fishing, and when we get there at daylight, the pond would be like a sheet of glass, and we would be fishing for mainly pan fishing, brim, red bellies, bluegill, stuff like that, sun perch. And as soon as the wind would get up like this, Dad would look at me and say, all right, son, it's time to change to real light, ultralight tackle now. Light sinkers, light corks, tiny, like porcupine quill type corks, that's real bright colored. And I would say, why? And he said, well, it's either going to be that or we're going to fish on the bottom. He said, because this water rough like that, your cork's sitting there bobbing up and down, you can't tell if you're getting a bite or not. He said, but if you got ultralight tackle, then if the fish hits it, it goes under and it's gone and you know you've got a bite. Or if you're fishing on the bottom, he said, you're not looking for a cork, you're tight line fishing, and all of a sudden your rod and reel just starts tipping on the end like that, and you jerk it. He said it's going to be either way like that. And we always caught lots of fish. I mean, there's times we would catch as high as 200 panfish in a trip with my father. There's always devil cleaning them all. A lot of times we just put them in the freezer in a 5-gallon bucket full of water and then clean them later. But that was a lesson I learned from my dad. The other times I remember is when my dad would look at me a lot of times, especially early spring. It would still be really cold in the mornings, and we'd be sitting on a Saturday morning, and he'd look at me and go, son, you want to go fishing? I'm like, Dad, it's like 30-something degrees outside. He goes, let's go fishing. But I'd bundle up, and of course my dad was just a man of men. I mean, he'd just wear a regular shirt, but I'd be bundled up, and we'd go by the bait shop, and my dad would get a minnow bucket full of minnows. I'm like, what are we fishing for? He said, we're going to fish for goggle eye and white perch. And he'd get brim, he'd get worms. And we'd always go to this reservoir here, Flint Creek Reservoir, and we go all the way to the back dam back there. And when you got back there, my dad was pretty wise. You got back there and the wind was blowing, but where the dam was, like looking at this right here, there's like a sheet of glass here. Even though this water's rough right here at this dam, it's not. And the way the water's slick right there at the dam, see, Dad would know that about in the back of that lake back there because the wind was blocked off by all the trees and by the dam. And he knew we could fish and we could catch fish in that calm water like that. And we'd be broke from the cold. The wind wasn't hitting us, and we could sit there on the backside of that dam and fish. And actually, it was very comfortable because the sun would be out a lot of times. And the sun would be hitting that dam. I mean, that was just the beauty of someone who knew what was going on. And as we would sit there and fish, I can well remember, you throw that, Dad always showed me how to hook a minnow. He said, depending on what you're catching with it. He said, sometimes some of them you hook them through the middle of the back up here, and some of them you hook them right in the tip of the tail. He said, depends on what you're fishing for. And we'd put some minnows on there and throw it out there, and the cork would just start moving across the water. You just watch the cork just moving, and the minnow would be swimming around with your cork. The next thing you know, it'd be just gone. And he'd always tell me, now son, if it's a white perch, don't jerk it. Just kind of catch your slack up in it and pull on it. He said, if you jerk it too hard, you'll pull the hook out of their mouth because their mouth's real thin. And we'd sit there and we'd catch 15 to 20 big old white perch and some big old goggle eye. Some people call them goggle eye, some people call them warmouth brim. I think up north they call them a rock bass. But we'd take all them things home and we'd catch a big old, I call them big old brim, big as your hand, just wouldn't hardly fit across them. We'd bring all them home on a cold day like that and cook them up. Mama would make some hush puppies and with onions and pepper and, I mean, good old home ground cornmeal, and cook the fish in good old home ground cornmeal from corn we raised. And I tell you, those times, just people have lost that kind of stuff today, and they don't know what it's like to actually live life and enjoy it to its fullest. I well remember one morning when we went fishing. It was in the early spring. It done warmed up. We knew it had warmed up, the water in the pond, because when you see the bullgrass coming through the edge of the pond water, You know the water in the pond is already 60 degrees, which means it's warm enough for fish to spawn. And it was me, my dad, and my brother-in-law. We was in an aluminum boat. We just put out at the launching pad, and Dad said, "Look, let's just motor along the dam here." He had a little trolling motor. He said, "Let's just run along this dam here, and we're gonna get over to the other side of the pond over there and start with all the way to the other side, and we'll drift and fish back. When we get through, we'll already be back at the boat launch." As we was motoring down that boat launch with that, my dad, there was cattails growing along the edge of the dam in a spot there. My father told me, he said, "Son, watch out, there's a big old moccasin in that water up there in front of you." Because I was at the head of the boat. And I turned around and looked up in front of me, and I saw big fin points just sticking up out of the water, just sitting there moving. I said, "Dad, that ain't no snake, that's a fish." And I reached, and we had a big old dip net in the boat there, and I reached and got the dip net. I told him, I said, "Just stay the course, don't move." And he was just motoring along that little trolling motor, which was real quiet. And I took that dip net and put it underneath the water and locked it under the back of my arm here. And as we went by those cattails, I just stuck that dip net out in that stuff and picked up on it. And I lifted a fish up out of the water that was over 24 inches long. It was a female bass. She was in there fixing to spawn. And my dad looked at me and he said, "Son, if I had not witnessed that with my own eyes, I would have never believed it." I mean, I picked that bass up and its mouth, you could have stuck a number 10 coffee can in his mouth almost. It was just huge. And the belly was all swelled out on it real big. He said, "That's a big old female bass right there, son." He said, "What you gonna do with it?" I said, "I'm gonna take her and I'm gonna have her mounted." And the mounting story is a story all its own. I'm not even gonna get into that, but that is probably my most memorable moment fishing with my father, is catching that big old bass with just a dip net. I guess one of the funniest times I ever had when I went fishing is me and another guy went fishing. We were both teenagers. I had just got a little Datsun pickup truck, if y'all remember what those are. And I had that thing, I overhauled the engine in it, got it running, and one of my friends told me, said, "Let's go fishing." So I told him, I said, "Okay." So I said, "Dad, can we borrow your aluminum boat?" And he's like, "Yeah, go ahead." So I was gathering up stuff to put in the boat. We had put it in the back of the truck, and I took the end of the anchor rope, and I said, "Here, tie the boat." And I threw it to him, and I got stuff and was putting it in the boat, and he took the anchor rope and ran it over to the end of the boat there, and he pulled. It was hard. He pulled it and tied it off, and we took off down the road. We was going fishing. It was early in the morning, and we was headed out to the lake, and we got about 15 miles down the highway and on an old backwoods road, and I looked in the back of the truck and the boat wasn't there. And I looked and I told him, I said, "Hey, I thought you tied that boat in there." He said, "I did." I said, "Well, it ain't back there." So we put on brakes and turned around and went back, and luckily, there was no traffic on the road. The old aluminum boat had slid out of the back of the truck, and it went in the grass in the edge of the road. It didn't hurt the boat, didn't knock a hole in the bottom of it or nothing. We didn't have no trolling motor, no batteries in it. We just had paddles and fishing rods. And we loaded that thing back up, and what he had done was the end of the anchor rope was tied to the anchor, and he pulled on it, and because I guess he thought I had tied it to the truck or something, it didn't move. He just tied the anchor to the boat. It wasn't tied to the truck at all, and we lost it out of the back of the truck. Of course, I didn't tell my dad that when I got home, but we went on fishing, and we caught a nice little mess of fish that day. But things like that are things that when you're just a young teenage boy, you don't stop and think about all the things you need to check when you're putting a boat in a truck and all that kind of stuff. And it can make for a hazardous situation, but at the same time, it can just be downright funny at the end.